The diary was found in the walls of a cabin that had stood in Big Ivy, North Carolina, for more than 100 years. In the winter of 1983, when the last descendant of the Carson family finally sold the property to the Historical Society, workers began the careful work of preserving what remained. The cabin had been built in the 1840s, its hand-hewn timbers bearing the marks of axes that had long since rusted to dust. The roof had collapsed in places, and the floorboards had rotted through, but the chimney still stood, a monument to the craftsmanship of an earlier age. It was behind a loose stone in that chimney that the workers found the diary. The stone had been deliberately set in place, its edges chipped to fit snugly against its neighbors, and behind it was a small cavity just large enough to hold a leather-bound book wrapped in oilcloth and tied with a leather strap that had dried to the consistency of paper. The oilcloth had preserved the diary remarkably well, protecting it from the damp that had seeped into every other corner of the cabin. When the Historical Society's archivist carefully opened the book, she found the ink still legible, the handwriting still clear. The cover bore the name of a man who had died in 1864, a man who had no known connection to North Carolina, a man who was supposed to have been buried in an unmarked grave in Virginia. The name was Elias Whitfield, and according to every official record, he had been killed in action during the Battle of Saltville on October 2, 1864. His body had never been recovered, but his death had been accepted as a fact of war, one of the countless casualties that had marked the final, desperate months of the Confederacy. But the diary suggested otherwise. It contained 112 pages of closely written script, the record of a Confederate officer's final months of life. The entries were filled with observations about the war, the dwindling hopes of the Confederacy, the growing despair that had gripped the army. They were also filled with something else, something that set the archivist's heart racing, a secret. The entries ended abruptly on October 2, 1864, with words that have haunted everyone who has read them since. Tomorrow we march to Saltville. I must find the courage to do what I have been asked. If this book is ever found, let it be known that I acted not out of hate but out of duty. The truth must not die with me. The man who wrote those words was never seen alive again. His body was never recovered. And the truth he had promised to protect, the secret he had carried into the mountains of southwestern Virginia, remained hidden for more than a century. The Battle of Saltville, which took place on October 2, 1864, was one of the most savage and least documented engagements of the Civil War. The salt works at Saltville, Virginia, were vital to the Confederate war effort, producing the salt needed to preserve meat for Lee's army. Without that salt, the Confederate forces would have been unable to feed themselves through the winter, and the war would have effectively ended months before Appomattox. The Union command, recognizing the strategic importance of the site, had launched 2 campaigns to destroy it. The first, in August 1864, had been repulsed with heavy losses on both sides. The second, in October, was a desperate attempt to cut off the Confederate supply line before winter set in. The battle itself was a slaughter. Union forces, commanded by General Stephen Burbridge, attacked the Confederate defenses with a ferocity born of frustration. The Confederate defenders, outnumbered but entrenched, held their ground with equal determination. The fighting was brutal, hand-to-hand in places, with men clubbing each other with rifle butts and bayonets when their ammunition ran out. By nightfall, the Union forces had been driven back, having suffered more than 500 casualties. The Confederates had lost nearly 300 men, a significant number for an army that could not afford to lose anyone. But it was not the battle that would become the subject of investigation and controversy. It was what happened after the fighting ended. Accounts from the time describe a massacre of black Union soldiers, men who had been captured or wounded during the battle and who were summarily executed by Confederate troops. The number of victims varies depending on the source, from as few as 12 to as many as 50. What is not disputed is that the killings occurred, that they were carried out with a brutality that shocked even hardened veterans of the war, and that they were covered up by Confederate officers who feared the repercussions of their actions. The massacre at Saltville was not an isolated incident. Throughout the Civil War, black soldiers who were captured by Confederate forces were often murdered rather than taken prisoner. The Confederacy had officially refused to recognize black soldiers as legitimate combatants, and the men who fought in the United States colored troops knew that they faced death if they were captured. But the Saltville massacre was particularly brutal, particularly well documented, and particularly shameful for those who had participated in it. The diary found in the Carson cabin, however, suggested that the massacre was not the only secret buried at Saltville. The writer, Elias Whitfield, had been attached to the headquarters of General John Hunt Morgan, the legendary raider whose death in September 1864 had shocked the Confederacy. Whitfield had been with Morgan in Greenville, Tennessee, when the general was betrayed and killed. And he had carried something away from the scene, something that Morgan had entrusted to him on his deathbed. The diary described the object in veiled terms. He gave me the papers in the final hour, pressing them into my hands with the urgency of a dying man. They must reach Richmond, he said. They must reach the president. Without them, everything we have fought for is lost. I did not know what they contained, but I promised him. I promised. The papers, whatever they were, had never reached Richmond. Whitfield had carried them through the chaos of the Confederate retreat, through the battle at Saltville, and into the mountains where he had disappeared. The diary offered no explanation for his failure to deliver them. It only recorded his anguish, his sense of duty, and his growing fear that the papers had placed him in mortal danger. The investigation into Whitfield's disappearance began in 1984, when the diary was brought to the attention of a historian at Virginia Tech, a Civil War specialist named Margaret Hollister. Hollister had spent 20 years studying the campaigns in southwestern Virginia, focusing on the little-known battles that had shaped the region's history. She had written extensively on the Battle of Saltville and had long suspected that the official accounts were incomplete. The diary was the key she had been waiting for. Hollister's first task was to verify Whitfield's existence. She found his name in Confederate muster rolls, his rank confirmed, his unit identified as the 2nd Kentucky Cavalry, Morgan's command. The record showed that he had enlisted in 1862, that he had risen through the ranks, and that he had been cited for bravery on several occasions. He was, by all accounts, a competent and dedicated officer, the kind of man who could be trusted with sensitive missions. She found his widow's pension application, filed in 1867, which described him as killed in action near Saltville, Virginia, October 1864. The application was accompanied by a letter from a fellow soldier, a man named Thomas Randolph, who swore that he had seen Whitfield fall during the fighting. Randolph's account was vague, describing Whitfield being struck by a bullet and collapsing, but it did not specify where the body had fallen or what had happened to it. The pension was granted, and Whitfield's widow received a small stipend until her own death in 1881. But Hollister began to suspect that Whitfield had not died in battle. His diary suggested that he had survived the fighting, that he had been pursued into the mountains by men who wanted the papers he was carrying. The final entries were filled with paranoia, with the sense of being watched, with the conviction that someone was following him. On the last page, written in a hand that had become increasingly unsteady, he wrote, "They are close now. I can see their fires in the distance. I will hide the papers where no one will find them. If I am taken, they will not get them. I will not let them." The diary ended there. Whitfield's fate was unknown. But Hollister was determined to find the papers, to uncover the secret that had cost a man his life. The search led Hollister to the archives of the Confederate government, which had been captured by Union forces in 1865 and were stored in the National Archives in Washington, D.C. She spent months combing through the records, looking for any mention of Morgan's mission. She found a letter from General Robert E. Lee to President Jefferson Davis, dated September 1864, in which Lee expressed concern about the security of certain documents that Morgan was carrying. The letter did not specify what the documents contained, but it suggested they were of the highest importance. Lee's letter was brief and cryptic, the kind of communication that a commanding officer would send when he was worried about a security breach. He wrote, "I have received intelligence that General Morgan is in possession of documents of a sensitive nature. These documents, should they fall into enemy hands, could cause irreparable harm to our cause. I urge you to ensure that they are safely transported to Richmond without delay." Davis's reply was equally cryptic. He acknowledged receipt of Lee's letter and promised to send a courier to retrieve the documents. But there is no record that the courier ever arrived. Morgan was killed in Greenville before the documents could be retrieved, and Whitfield, who had been entrusted with them, had disappeared into the mountains. Hollister also found a series of telegrams exchanged between Confederate officials in Richmond and Saltville, dated late September and early October 1864. The telegrams were coded, but Hollister managed to decipher them with the help of a cryptographer at the National Archives. They revealed that a group of Confederate officers had been dispatched to intercept Whitfield, to retrieve the papers he was carrying. The officers were under orders to use any means necessary to recover the documents. The telegrams named the officers, Major Thomas Ballard, a veteran of the Virginia Cavalry, and 3 of his subordinates. They had been sent from Richmond to Saltville on September 28, 1864, 2 days before the battle. Their mission was to find Whitfield and bring him back, dead or alive. Hollister tracked the movements of Ballard and his men through the archives, finding reports of their activities that raised disturbing questions. On October 3, the day after the battle, Ballard reported that Whitfield had been disposed of. The report did not specify what that meant, but it suggested that Whitfield had been killed. Ballard's report also noted that the papers Whitfield was carrying had not been recovered. He suggested that Whitfield had hidden them in the mountains, and that a search should be organized to find them. The Confederate High Command approved the search, but the war ended before it could be carried out. The papers, whatever they contained, remained hidden. Hollister's investigation was complicated by the sheer scale of the terrain she was dealing with. The mountains of southwestern Virginia are a labyrinth of hollows, ridges, and forests, a landscape that had swallowed countless men over the centuries. Whitfield could have hidden the papers anywhere, in a cave, a hollow log, a crevice in the rock. The search would require a thorough and systematic examination of the area, a task that was beyond the resources of a single historian. But Hollister was not alone. She enlisted the help of a local historical society, a group of amateur archaeologists and Civil War enthusiasts who had spent years studying the battlefields of the region. They organized a series of expeditions into the mountains, combing the area around Saltville for any sign of Whitfield's hiding place. They found nothing. The Historical Society members were dedicated but inexperienced. They lacked the training to conduct a proper archaeological survey, and they were hampered by the rugged terrain. The mountains were steep and heavily forested, with no clear trails to follow. They spent days hacking through underbrush, searching for signs of a man who had disappeared more than a century ago. The search was frustrating, and the volunteers began to lose hope. In the summer of 1986, however, they made a discovery that changed everything. A team of volunteers was exploring a cave near the summit of a ridge that overlooked the battlefield when they found the remains of a man. The body, which had been remarkably well preserved by the cave's dry atmosphere, was wearing the remnants of a Confederate uniform. The regimental insignia was still visible on the collar, identifying the man as a member of the 2nd Kentucky Cavalry. Hollister was certain that she had found Elias Whitfield. The cave was small, barely large enough to accommodate a man lying down. The body was positioned against the far wall, as if the man had crawled into the cave to escape his pursuers and had died there. The uniform was tattered, the fabric rotted, but the buttons and insignia were still intact. Hollister carefully examined the remains, noting the signs of trauma. The skull was fractured, a blow that had been delivered with considerable force. Whitfield had not died of natural causes. He had been murdered. The cave contained more than the body. Near the skeletal remains, the volunteers found a leather satchel, its contents still intact. Inside were a collection of papers, yellowed and brittle with age, covered in handwriting that matched Whitfield's. They were the documents that Morgan had entrusted to him, the documents that had cost him his life. Hollister was at last able to read them. The papers were a revelation, a piece of history that had been hidden for more than a century. They contained the details of a plot to assassinate Abraham Lincoln, a conspiracy that had been hatched in the Confederate High Command in the summer of 1864. Morgan, who had been tasked with carrying out the plot, had grown uneasy with the plan and had decided to expose it. The papers were his confession, his testimony to the existence of a conspiracy that extended to the highest levels of the Confederate government. The assassination plot was not the work of John Wilkes Booth, who would kill Lincoln in April 1865. It was an earlier plan, one that had been devised before the 1864 election. The conspirators, a group of Confederate officers and civilians, had planned to assassinate Lincoln and his cabinet, plunging the Union into chaos and giving the Confederacy a chance to negotiate a peace. Morgan, who had been recruited for the plot, had agreed to participate but had later changed his mind. He had decided to expose the conspiracy, to prevent the assassination from taking place. The papers contained the names of the conspirators, including a prominent Confederate general and a member of the Confederate cabinet. They also contained a detailed account of the plot, describing how the assassinations were to be carried out and how the conspirators planned to escape. The papers were a ticking time bomb, a threat to the legitimacy of the Confederate government and a potential source of scandal for the Union. Morgan had entrusted the papers to Whitfield, his most trusted aide, with the instruction to deliver them to President Davis. But Whitfield, a man of conscience, had hesitated. He had seen the chaos and bloodshed that the plot would cause, and he had decided to hide the papers rather than deliver them. He had gone into the mountains to wait, hoping that the war would end before he had to make a decision. But the conspirators had tracked him down, and he had died in the cave, taking the secret with him. The papers also contained a letter from Morgan, dated just days before his death, that explained his decision to expose the plot. Morgan had been a Confederate hero, a man who had fought with distinction and had been celebrated throughout the South. But he had become disillusioned with the war, with the violence and bloodshed, and he had begun to question the cause he was fighting for. The assassination plot was the final straw. He could not stand by and allow such a crime to be committed. Morgan's letter was a powerful document, a testament to a man who had risked everything to do what he believed was right. He wrote, "I have served the Confederacy with all my heart, but I cannot serve it in this. The assassination of Lincoln would be a crime against humanity, a sin that would forever stain our cause. I cannot be a part of it. I will not be a part of it." Asterisk. The discovery of the papers was a sensation, a piece of history that had been lost for generations. Hollister published her findings in a scholarly journal, and the story was picked up by the national media. The conspiracy, which had been a footnote in the historical record, became a subject of intense interest, a reminder of the desperate and violent politics of the Civil War era. But the story was not complete. Hollister had found the papers, but she had not found the answer to the question that had driven her investigation: what had happened to Whitfield? The papers suggested that he had been killed by the conspirators, but they did not provide the details. Hollister was determined to find out. She returned to the archives, searching for any clue that might explain Whitfield's death. She found a letter from a Union officer who had been present at the battle, a man who had witnessed something unusual in the aftermath of the fighting. The officer, a colonel named Samuel Hayes, had been taken prisoner during the battle and had observed the Confederate forces as they retreated into the mountains. He described seeing a group of Confederate soldiers, well mounted and well armed, searching the mountains near the battlefield. They were, he said, looking for something, though I could not determine what. Hayes's letter was dated 1865, just weeks after the war ended. He had written it to his wife, describing his experiences during the battle and his observations of the Confederate army. The letter mentioned the searching soldiers in passing, noting that they seemed to be acting independently of the main Confederate force. Hayes had assumed that they were looking for deserters or stray soldiers, but he had noted their unusual behavior. Hollister realized that Hayes had witnessed something significant. The soldiers he described were probably the men sent by Ballard to find Whitfield. They had been searching the mountains for the papers, but they had failed to find them. Whitfield had hidden them too well. The officer's account, combined with the telegrams Hollister had found, suggested that the conspirators had sent their own men to find Whitfield. They had tracked him to the cave, killed him, and taken the papers. But the papers had not been taken. They were still in the satchel when Hollister found them. The conspirators had failed to find them, had left them behind in the cave, waiting for someone to discover them. Hollister's investigation was nearly over, but one mystery remained. The diary found in the Carson cabin had been wrapped in oilcloth and hidden in a chimney, far from the cave where Whitfield's body had been found. How had the diary gotten to North Carolina? Whitfield had no known connection to the Carson family, no reason to leave his diary in a cabin in Big Ivy. The answer came from a descendant of the Carson family, a woman named Eliza Carson, who had inherited the cabin from her grandmother. She told Hollister that her grandfather had been a Confederate soldier, a man named William Carson, who had served in the 2nd Kentucky Cavalry alongside Whitfield. He had been with Whitfield in the mountains, had seen him die, and had taken the diary to protect it. He had hidden it in the chimney, hoping that one day it would be found and the truth would be revealed. Eliza Carson was an elderly woman, in her 80s, but her memory was sharp. She recalled her grandfather telling her stories about the war, about the battles he had fought, the friends he had lost. He had spoken often of Whitfield, describing him as a brave and honorable man, a man who had been betrayed by his own country. He had never told her the full story, but he had always said that there was a secret, something that Whitfield had carried with him to his death. Hollister asked Eliza Carson if she knew where Whitfield had hidden the papers. The old woman shook her head. She had no idea. But she told Hollister that her grandfather had often walked in the mountains, visiting places that had meaning for him. He had never explained where he was going, but she suspected that he was searching for something. She believed that her grandfather had tried to find the papers himself, but that he had never succeeded. Eliza Carson's testimony was a crucial piece of the puzzle. It confirmed that Whitfield had been in the mountains, that he had died there, and that he had hidden the papers. It also suggested that her grandfather had been trying to find the papers, to complete Whitfield's mission. But he had died in 1899, and his secret had died with him. The story of Elias Whitfield is a story of forgotten history, a tale of a conspiracy that could have changed the course of the war. It is also a story of a man who made a choice, who chose to hide the truth rather than deliver it, who chose to protect the lives of the conspirators rather than expose them. Whitfield's decision was not a simple one. He was a man of conscience, a man who believed in the cause of the Confederacy but who also believed in the rule of law. He had been torn between his duty to his country and his duty to his conscience. The diary found in the Carson cabin offers a glimpse into his soul, his struggle, his ultimate decision. He could have delivered the papers to Davis, could have exposed the conspiracy and prevented the assassination. But he chose to hide them, to let the secret die with him. He believed that the truth, if it were revealed, would cause more harm than good. He believed that the conspirators, if they were exposed, would only be replaced by others. He believed that the best course of action was to let the past remain buried. Whitfield was not a coward. He had fought bravely in the war, had risked his life on numerous occasions. But he was also a man who understood the cost of violence, who had seen too much death and destruction. He could not bring himself to add to the bloodshed by revealing the conspiracy. He chose to remain silent. But his silence was not complete. He had written a diary, a record of his thoughts and fears, a testament to his struggle. He had hidden the diary in the chimney of a cabin, hoping that it would one day be found. He had wanted the truth to be known, even if he could not bear to reveal it himself. The discovery of Whitfield's diary and the papers he had carried is a reminder of the complexity of history, of the countless stories that have been lost to time. It is a reminder of the men and women who lived through the Civil War, who made choices that we can only imagine. It is a reminder of the secrets that still lie buried in the mountains of Appalachia, waiting for someone to find them. The papers Whitfield carried, the plot to assassinate Lincoln, was a conspiracy that was never carried out. The assassination would happen in April 1865, in Ford's Theater, by a man who may have been inspired by the same hatred that had motivated the conspirators of 1864. But the earlier plot, the one that Whitfield had exposed, was a piece of history that had been hidden for more than a century. It was a reminder of the violence and desperation of the war, of the lengths to which men would go to achieve their goals. The final twist in the story came when Hollister examined the papers more closely. She discovered that they contained not only the details of the assassination plot but also a confession from the conspirators, a statement of their motives and their beliefs. They had believed that Lincoln was a tyrant, that he had brought the war on the South, that he was responsible for the destruction of their way of life. They had believed that killing him was the only way to save their country. The confession was a chilling document, a glimpse into the minds of men who were willing to kill for their beliefs. It was also a reminder of the hatred that had driven the war, the deep divisions that had torn the country apart. Hollister realized that the assassination plot was not an isolated event but a part of a larger pattern, a pattern of violence and hatred that had plagued the country for generations. The conspiracy was not limited to the Confederate High Command. It extended to civilians, to politicians, to men of influence who had supported the war and who were willing to do anything to win it. The papers identified a network of conspirators, a shadowy organization that had been planning the assassination for months. They had recruited Morgan, hoping that his reputation and his influence would give the plot legitimacy. But Morgan had refused, and the conspirators had been forced to find another way. The papers also revealed that the conspirators had considered other targets. They had discussed the possibility of assassinating the entire Union cabinet, of plunging the government into chaos. They had considered using explosives, poison, and other methods to achieve their goals. The plot was not a simple one, but a complex and sophisticated operation that had been planned in careful detail. Hollister was struck by the contrast between the conspirators' ambitions and their ultimate failure. They had planned a crime that would have changed history, but they had been unable to carry it out. Morgan's betrayal, Whitfield's hiding of the papers, the chaos of the war, all had conspired to prevent the plot from being realized. The conspiracy had been a failure, but it had been a close one. The story of Elias Whitfield, the man who had hidden the papers and died in the cave, is a story that challenges us to think about the nature of truth, of history, of memory. It is a story that reminds us that the past is not always what it seems, that there are stories that have been lost, secrets that have been buried. It is a story that asks us to look beyond the official accounts, to question the narratives that have been handed down to us, to seek out the truth, no matter how difficult it may be. Hollister's investigation is a testament to the power of research, of the importance of history. It is a reminder that the past is not just a collection of facts and dates but a living thing, a story that continues to unfold. The discovery of Whitfield's diary and the papers he had carried is a gift to history, a piece of the puzzle that had been missing for generations. It is a reminder of the complexity of the Civil War, of the many factors that shaped the course of the conflict. But Hollister's work also raises troubling questions about the nature of historical inquiry. How much of the past has been lost, erased, or forgotten? How many stories like Whitfield's are still waiting to be discovered? And what does it mean for our understanding of history when we discover that the official narratives are incomplete or false? These questions have no easy answers. History is a complex and messy thing, full of contradictions and ambiguities. The past is not a fixed thing but a story that is constantly being retold, reinterpreted, and revised. The discovery of Whitfield's diary is a reminder that history is always being written, always being rediscovered. In the end, the story of Elias Whitfield and the Saltville Massacre's final secret is a story about the power of a single person to shape history. Whitfield was not a general, not a president, not a famous figure. He was a captain, a soldier, a man who served his country and tried to do what he believed was right. But his decision, his act of conscience, had a ripple effect that extended far beyond his own life. He had the opportunity to expose a conspiracy, to prevent an assassination, to save lives. He chose not to. And his choice, whatever its motives, had consequences that we can only imagine. Whitfield's story is a tragedy, a tale of a man who was caught between competing loyalties, who was unable to make a decision that could satisfy both his conscience and his duty. He tried to do what he believed was right, but he was unable to escape the consequences of his actions. He died in a cave, alone and afraid, his mission unfulfilled. The discovery of Whitfield's diary is a reminder of the countless other stories that are still waiting to be found, the secrets that still lie buried in the archives, the mountains, the caves. It is a reminder of the importance of history, of the need to preserve and protect the past. It is a reminder that the past is not a fixed thing but a living thing, a story that continues to be told, a story that we are all a part of. The diary of Elias Whitfield is now housed in the archives of Virginia Tech, a testament to the life and work of a man who tried to do the right thing. Hollister's research, which culminated in a book, is a work of historical scholarship that has reshaped our understanding of the Civil War. But the mystery that began with the diary's discovery is still not entirely solved. The diary was hidden in the walls of a cabin, far from the cave where Whitefield died. How did it get there? And what does it tell us about the man who hid it? The answer may lie in the Carson family's own history, in the story of the grandfather who served with Whitefield, who watched him die, who took the diary and hid it away. The diary, which had been hidden for more than a century, is a key that unlocks not only the story of Whitefield but also the story of the Carson family, the story of the war, the story of the nation. The diary is a reminder that the past is always with us, that the stories of the dead are never truly forgotten. The story of Elias Whitefield, the captain who carried a secret into the mountains, is a story that will continue to captivate, to inspire, to challenge. It is a story about a man who made a choice, who chose to hide the truth rather than reveal it, who chose to protect his country rather than expose its failings. It is a story about the power of conscience, the limits of duty, the fragility of the truth. It is a story that echoes down the years, a story of sacrifice and sorrow, a story that will never be fully told. But there is another dimension to Whitefield's story, one that has been largely overlooked. The papers he carried, the conspiracy he had hidden, were not just about the assassination of Lincoln. They were also about the future of the Confederacy, about the hope that the war could be won, about the belief that the South could still achieve its independence. The conspirators were desperate men, men who had seen their cause slipping away, men who were willing to do anything to save it. Their desperation, their willingness to commit murder, was a measure of their despair. Whitefield understood that desperation. He had fought in the war, had seen the suffering and the sacrifice. He knew what the conspirators were feeling, and he knew why they were willing to go to such lengths. He had been tempted to join them, to embrace their plan and help them carry it out. But he had refused. He had chosen a different path, a path of conscience and duty. His choice is a reminder that history is not just a matter of events and dates but of individual decisions, the choices that men and women make in moments of crisis. Whitefield's decision to hide the papers, to let the truth remain buried, was a decision that had far-reaching consequences. It prevented the assassination plot from being exposed, and it allowed the conspirators to go unpunished. But it also preserved the secret, kept it hidden until someone could discover it. And yet, there is still one question that lingers: why did Whitefield keep a diary at all? In the world of the Confederacy, a soldier who kept such a detailed record of his thoughts and actions was taking a great risk. If the diary had fallen into Union hands, it would have been a valuable intelligence source. If it had been seen by Whitefield's own comrades, it could have compromised him. Why did he take that risk? What drove him to write down his fears and his secrets? The answer, perhaps, lies in the nature of the man himself. Whitefield was a soldier, but he was also an intellectual, a man who believed in the power of words. He wanted to record his experiences, to leave a legacy, to tell his story. He may have suspected that his mission would fail, that he would not survive, and he wanted to ensure that the truth was preserved. He wrote his diary as a message, a testament to his life and his beliefs. The discovery of that message, more than a century after it was written, is a testament to the power of history, to the resilience of the human spirit, to the enduring need to tell our stories. Whitefield's diary is a document of great historical significance, a glimpse into a lost world, a window into a past that is both familiar and strange. It is a reminder of the sacrifices that were made, the choices that were taken, the secrets that were kept. The story of the Saltville Massacre's final secret is a story that will continue to be told, to be studied, to be debated. It is a story that challenges us to think about the nature of truth and the power of history. It is a story that reveals the complexity of the Civil War, the many forces that shaped its course, the many voices that were lost. And it is a story that ends not with a final answer but with a final question: what other secrets still lie buried in the mountains, waiting to be found? Margaret Hollister's work did not end with the discovery of Whitefield's diary and the papers he had carried. She continued to research the conspiracy, to track down the families of the conspirators, to piece together the full story of the plot. Her book, published in 1991, was a landmark work of historical scholarship, a detailed account of the assassination plot that had been hidden for more than a century. But Hollister's book also raised new questions. The conspiracy, she argued, was not a failure. It had succeeded in its goal of destabilizing the Union government, even if the assassination itself had never been carried out. The fear of assassination, the suspicion that Lincoln might be killed, had created a climate of paranoia and violence that had shaped the course of the war. The conspiracy had been a success, even though it had never achieved its primary objective. Hollister's interpretation was controversial, and it sparked a lively debate among historians. Some argued that she was overstating the significance of the plot, that it was a minor footnote in the history of the war. Others agreed that the conspiracy had been a serious threat, one that had been dismissed too lightly by scholars. The debate continues to this day, a testament to the enduring fascination of the story. The Diary of Elias Whitfield is now a part of the historical record, a document that will be studied and debated for generations to come. It is a reminder of the complexity of history, of the many stories that are waiting to be discovered. It is a testament to the power of the written word, to the enduring need to tell our stories. And it is a challenge to us all to seek out the truth, to uncover the secrets that have been buried, to remember the forgotten dead. The final discovery in this story came in 1995, when a team of archaeologists returned to the cave where Whitfield had died. They had been inspired by Hollister's work, and they wanted to learn more about the man who had hidden the papers. They excavated the cave carefully, sifting through the soil and debris, looking for any trace of Whitfield's belongings. They found a small metal box, buried beneath the rocks near the entrance of the cave. Inside were a collection of personal items, a pocket watch, a ring, a fragment of a letter. The watch was inscribed with the name Elias Whitfield and the date 1862. The ring was gold, with a small ruby set in the center. The letter was fragmentary, but it was addressed to Whitfield's wife, telling her that he loved her and that he would return to her soon. The discovery of the metal box was a poignant reminder of the humanity of the man who had died in the cave. Whitfield had been a person, a husband, a father. He had loved and been loved. He had fought in a war that had taken everything from him. And he had died alone, in a cave in the mountains, his mission unfulfilled. The archaeologists also found evidence that Whitfield had not died alone. The soil near the entrance of the cave contained footprints, preserved in the dry, dusty earth. The footprints were made by several people, and they suggested that Whitfield had been cornered in the cave by his pursuers. He had crawled into the back of the cave to hide, but they had found him. The blow to his head had been delivered by someone standing over him, someone who had been determined to kill him. The story of Elias Whitfield is a story of violence and betrayal, of secrets and lies. It is a story of a man who was caught in the middle of a war that was tearing his country apart, a man who tried to do the right thing and paid for it with his life. It is a story that has been hidden for more than a century, a story that was finally told thanks to the perseverance of a historian and the discovery of a diary. But it is also a story that reminds us of the fragility of history, of the ease with which stories can be lost, of the importance of preserving the past. The Diary of Elias Whitfield was hidden in a chimney, wrapped in oilcloth, protected from the elements. It survived for more than a century, waiting for someone to find it. And when it was found, it opened a window onto a lost world, a world of secrets and conspiracies, of love and loss, of hope and despair. The diary is now a part of the historical record, a document that will be studied and debated for generations to come. But it is also a reminder of the countless other stories that are still waiting to be discovered, the secrets that still lie hidden in the archives, the mountains, the caves. The past is not a closed book, but a living thing, a story that continues to unfold. In the end, the story of Elias Whitfield is a story about the power of truth. Whitfield tried to